So we're with today was Sarah Keogh, who is a dietitian with the Coeliac Society of Ireland. And you're very, very welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you might start by telling us what is celiac and how does it affect the person who suffers from it?
So, celiac disease affects almost 1 in 50 people in Ireland, and it is an autoimmune disease, which means your body is attacking itself. For people with celiac disease, if they eat gluten, which we find in things like wheat and rye and barley, the gluten causes the body to attack itself. And the main place it attacks is your gut. So, lots of people with celiac disease will get things like maybe some diarrhea or constipation, bloating, stomach pain. But celiac disease can also affect lots of other parts of the body. So it can affect your nervous system. So people might get migraine, headaches, pins and needles, fatigue, loss of concentration. We even have some people will lose the ability to walk for a while with it, which mostly does recover, and it can affect your balance. But we also know that celiac disease can affect fertility. So it can be harder for both men and women to become parents, and women with undiagnosed celiac disease are more likely to have repeated miscarriage and may even have a stillborn baby. So
Wow.
we see, yeah, it's quite a serious disease. People often think of it as a sort of a bit of a food fad,
Yeah.
but if you have celiac disease, it's extremely important to avoid all gluten all the time.
Right. Is it a lifelong thing?
It is. At the moment, there's no cure for it,
Right.
and there isn't even sign of a cure on the horizon. There's a lot of research, but we just don't seem to have any way of curing it. But the treatment is a strict gluten-free diet, which works extremely well once someone cuts all the gluten out of their diet.
I presume diet, once you've just said it, presume it's a huge part of what's going on. And you being a dietitian would know all about it.
Well, this is it. I spend a lot of my time talking about gluten and gluten free. And the thing about a gluten free diet, I think for people who aren't celiac, it looks like a really simple thing. It looks like, well, sure, just buy gluten free bread or just buy gluten free pasta. But there's lots and lots goes on with that because gluten can turn up in lots of foods that you would never think of because can become an ingredient in lots of things. So, yes, it's in things like bread, cakes, biscuits, pasta, but you will also find gluten in lots of stock cubes, mayonnaise, tomato ketchup, herbs and spices. You'll even get it in lentils and icing sugar. So there's a huge number of foods that someone with celiac disease has to think about. And it's actually very difficult. It is, I often say it's one of the hardest diets because you have to think about gluten every meal, every day, every snack. Are you going out for dinner with friends? Are you going to try and buy a sandwich out? Do you know how hard that is for someone with celiac disease?
Yeah.
People with celiac disease are packing whole suitcases of gluten-free food when they go on holidays. Like it just impacts. And I always feel sorry. I'm not celiac myself, but I feel so sorry for the members of the Celiac Society that I work with because it is such a tough impact on your life. On the outside, it just looks like, oh, you're just been picky with your food. But on the inside, it can be really just very difficult for people to manage.
It's true, isn't it? Even a tiny amount of the wrong food
Yes.
can cause huge
And
problems. Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point to make, Patrick, because if I'd say to people, go back to when you were doing your fractions in school and you were doing like a half and a quarter. Well, for someone with celiac disease, if 20 millionths of their food is gluten, that is enough to cause a problem for them.
Wow.
So that means someone with celiac disease has to have a separate toaster because they can't put their bread in a toaster that ordinary toast has been in. They have to have separate butter because when you make toast, you end up leaving crumbs in the butter. So that there's more than enough gluten in that to be a problem. But I think one of the big difficulties for celiac disease is that about 40% of people with celiac disease, when they eat gluten, will get vomiting and diarrhea, will be very, very sick for about 2 days. 60% of people don't get that, or they might get a little bit of bloating. The problem is, though, that whether you're what I'll often call the vomiting celiac or the non-vomiting celiac, the damage on the inside is the same. So
Okay.
sometimes people will say, well, I'm only slightly celiac, or other people will say, well, you're only slightly celiac. But everybody needs, whether you're one who gets very sick or one who doesn't, got to keep an eye on what's going on the inside. So you just have to be just as strict with the diet.
Is there a treatment?
Not at the moment. So currently the treatment is just diet. And when I say just, it's a huge thing.
Yes,
So
it's
the diet is
a
treatment.
big understatement.
Big understanding it is. There are some trials and studies going on for medications, but really what they're aimed at is for those people who get horrible vomiting and diarrhea when they eat gluten. So they're trying to get a medication that if someone does accidentally get gluten, that there's something they can take so they are not having 2 days of, can you imagine having the worst tummy bug of your life for 2 days every time you eat gluten?
Yeah.
You know, I have some patients who just don't eat out anymore because they're just so nervous and have had that happen so many times. So that's where the medication is. At the moment, there's no other cure on the horizon for it. So it is the strict gluten-free diet that people need to go for. And I think one of the things that is just come up as an area of concern with the Coeliac Society in recent months is we're looking around school meals for children and that the government are bringing in free school meals for children. But a lot of our celiac children are having huge problems accessing those meals because maybe the school isn't choosing to include gluten-free meals or the companies that are providing them. Often they'll say, oh, they're made with gluten-free ingredients, but they're made in a location where there is gluten. But for celiac children, they just can't have that. So the Coeliac Society is doing a lot of work at the moment, trying to tackle that as an issue. And we really are asking everybody involved in the school meals program to really sit up and think about that they're not excluding these children from this program.
Is it always children that suffer
No,
first?
it's not. So what it is that with the school meals, obviously it's for children, but you can be diagnosed with celiac disease at any age. It can actually just
Wow,
turn up. Oh yeah, at any,
that's
you're never safe.
startling.
It is. So the most common age to be diagnosed is between your 40s and your 60s.
Huh.
I'd have patients diagnosed in their 80s. Now, sometimes people have had it for a long time before it was picked up, but it can actually just start out of the blue as well. So that there's no age where you can say, I've got away with it for celiac disease.
What about the experience of a first-time diagnosis? What's that like?
So for a lot of people, testing, if you think that you might have celiac disease, the most important thing to do is keep eating gluten, which is
Right.
a funny thing because if you stop the gluten, your test will come back negative even if you are celiac. So it's
Okay.
very important. Keep eating gluten. You go to your GP. You skip all the food sensitivity tests and the IgG tests. They will tell you nothing about gluten and nothing about celiac disease. What you're looking at is that you go to your doctor will do a blood test. If the blood test is high, then sometimes, particularly for children, they can be diagnosed just on a high blood test if it's very, very high. But for adults, most adults, with their doctor will send them to have the camera down, where they'll go in and they'll take a little pinch out of the bowel. It's totally painless,
Uh,
but they'll do a biopsy and then they'll have a look at that under a microscope. And from there, they'll come back and say, yes, you have celiac disease, or no, you don't.
okay. So what about things like pubs, restaurants, fast food outlets?
In
Are they
fairness,
out completely?
no, they're not. And you know what? A
Yeah.
lot of pubs and restaurants actually are fantastic. And, you know, a lot of them really understand that people with celiac disease would like to go out to birthday parties and go out for dinner with their friends. So lots and lots of pubs, restaurants, even fast food, are doing really great work around celiac disease. There's definitely more work to go because I know if someone with celiac disease has listened to me say that, they're going to tell me all the places that don't. So there's places where it's tricky. And I would say in fairness to restaurants, it's not always physically easy for a restaurant to get rid of the cross contamination. And that's difficulty. A lot of restaurant kitchens are very tiny, so it's not always possible for them to guarantee that something is gluten free. But what we do know for restaurants is that people need to check things like, you know, obviously, is there gluten in the meal that's being prepared? But, you know, if you're trying to get something like chips in a restaurant, the chips need to be cooked in a separate fryer.
Wow.
Because if you put chicken nuggets into a deep fat fryer, that oil is now full of gluten. And if you cook chips in it, those chips actually get more than enough gluten on them to be a problem. So, you know, you'll often see if you're going out for dinner with someone who's celiac, you know, they're going to say, well, you know, is the pasta gluten free? Are the chips cooked separately? You know, if you're doing me a toasted sandwich, have you got a separate toaster for the gluten free sandwiches? And, you know, a lot of restaurants understand why that's necessary. Sometimes people do get a bit of like, are you crazy? Does it need to be that strict? But
Yeah.
actually, fortunately, it does. And I know lots of people with celiac disease wish it wasn't. They'd love to be able to just go out and eat, but they do have to check these things.
It's a minefield.
It is. And, you know, one of the things I would say is that most people are great with it, but some people have this idea that it's just a fad or they're just doing it to be difficult, or can you not just eat the gluten today to make it easier on everybody else? And you're like, actually, no. Well, people do. And a lot of people get very self-conscious about, you know, I don't want to go out for dinner because if I ask about the gluten, this person is going to be mean about it or this, you know, and I think, you know, sometimes you need to get new friends. But on the other hand, you know, I often think that I think if we understood that this isn't a dietary fad for people with celiac disease, this isn't a trend, this isn't something they saw on Instagram yesterday,
Yeah.
this actually is the medical treatment for a very serious medical condition. Because people with celiac disease who don't follow a gluten-free diet get much higher rates of osteoporosis. They get it at an earlier age. There's a slight increased risk of bowel cancer. They can be very tired, very sick. So it's as I said, people with celiac disease would only love to be eating gluten.
Mm.
So when they are asking in a restaurant or asking when they're coming to your house, I think we need to have a lot more compassion and empathy for them. This is tough for them to ask and even tougher for them to live with it.
Isn't gluten-free food very expensive, isn't it? Is it still
Yeah.
prohibited?
Um,
Yeah.
and actually, Patrick, that's a really, really huge issue for a lot of people with celiac disease is that it is a lot more expensive to follow this diet. So gluten-free breads, pasta, biscuits, things like that are a lot more expensive. Even gluten-free oats we know, are at least 75% more expensive. And, sometimes people go, well, is this just people making a profit? No, it's actually harder to make these products. If you want to get gluten-free oats, you have to grow the oats in a separate field. You have to buy a separate combine harvester. You've got to walk the fields regularly to pull out if there's a sprig of barley growing up through it or anything. It's a huge amount of work. But the result is that if someone is celiac, then they have to buy bread that's a lot more expensive. They have to buy other products that are a lot more expensive. And it becomes an even bigger issue because often you'll have more than one person with celiac disease in a family.
Can you,
So, yeah. So
sorry,
what we are
can you claim tax back for those things?
So if you're PAYE, yes, at the end of the year, you can use your Med1 form to claim back tax. And you can do for two things. You can claim it back on anything that says gluten-free on the label, but you can also claim tax back for anything that is listed in Coeliac Society's food list book.
Right.
So we've a lot of foods in that list that don't say gluten-free on them, but actually are gluten-free. And if you're buying foods from that book, the revenue will actually accept that as part of your claim back at the end of the year. The difficulty is maybe if someone is, for example, on social welfare or they're not under PAYE, they can't benefit from that. So we are kind of lobbying a lot at the moment. There used to be a dietary allowance for people with celiac disease to help support them. And it's been abolished for a lot of people over the last few years. So we are working really hard to try and get that back in. And I know a question about that was raised in the Dáil only this week. So it's an issue that's just coming on. And particularly at the moment where people are really struggling, it's very important to have those supports back in because if you walk down the supermarket the next time and just look how much a gluten-free loaf of bread is compared to an ordinary one and how small the gluten-free bread is compared to the ordinary one with that, it is much more expensive for people to do this.
And are there other diseases that are related to celiac disease?
Yep, there are. So celiac disease is genetic, and the same genes that cause celiac disease also cause underactive thyroid and also cause type 1 diabetes. So those three diseases travel together quite a lot. So if someone has one, we will generally be checking you for the others over time with that. But we also see, certainly from studies we've done at the Coeliac Society, is with our members, we see a lot more psoriasis. So around 10% of our members also have psoriasis. We see links with someone, for example, who has Down syndrome is more likely to have celiac disease. And we will see it if someone is diagnosed with osteoporosis, particularly if it's at a kind of a younger age or it's quite severe for your age, it's also recommended that you would have a celiac test just to make sure that that's not what's actually going on for you.
Is there a gender split? Is there data behind sufferers for?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one in that if we look at who we have, who's celiac disease, 2/3 are women and 1/3 are men. And they're in terms of people who go to their doctor to be tested. However, when we actually take a section of the population and test, it looks like it's closer than it might be equal. So that tells us we're probably missing an awful lot of men who maybe aren't going to the doctor because sometimes the gut symptoms can be so mild, people don't think that there's anything wrong. That people don't think a little bit of bloating or a little bit of constipation or diarrhea, once a week is anything to go to the doctor with, but they can all be signs of celiac disease.
I was struck by one thing on your website that children with celiac disease have to make sacrifices for the likes of birthdays, celebrations, etc. That's tough, isn't it?
It's really tough. And my heart goes out to the children and their parents actually with them as well. So, we would give people advice around, if the child is going to a birthday party, that you might do a party box and bring some treats that are gluten-free. In fairness, a lot of families are brilliant in that if they know there's a child coming to the party who's celiac, they might actually just have everything gluten-free at the party. It isn't hard to do. It takes a bit of thinking, but it's not difficult. So then the child who's celiac can come and eat everything and not feel like they're on the outside. But some children, particularly if they've eaten out and they've got gluten and been sick, they can get very nervous and anxious about eating out. And as an adult, you can sort of say to yourself, look, I got it this time, doesn't mean it's going to happen next time. But for children, they can just be really scared with it. So sometimes you have kids who maybe don't get invited to the birthday party because they have an issue around gluten, and the people bringing them don't really understand or maybe are uncomfortable managing it. But also, even if they're going away, if there's a school trip and things like that, there's a lot more work. And we've sometimes had cases where children were told that they couldn't do home economics at school because they were celiac, which is not accurate at all. You absolutely can. But we work with schools and we work with childminders, we work with creches, we'll talk to anybody about it. So it's really just trying to make it easier for children so they don't have to be anxious about being very sick.
And what advice would the society give to people who are traveling abroad, those with celiac disease?
So, I mean, some countries are absolutely fantastic. So we know that from members, Spain and Italy seem to be brilliant places to go if you're celiac, with varying reports from other countries. So I think it depends on where you go. But if you are going on holidays, do get in touch with us because we have little language cards. So they're like a credit card size. And it's just in loads of different languages from around the world that you can go anywhere and sort of hand that in a restaurant or in a hotel, and it'll explain, I'm celiac, this is what I can't have. And they actually work really, really well. So if people are traveling, do let us know, get in touch with us, and they're available to our members. So they're no problem for anybody to look at. It can be useful to contact the Coeliac Society in the country that you're going to. Now, different societies work at different levels in different countries, so some will be more helpful than others. And it's often just, you know yourself, down to resources, how many people are actually working on the team. Like we have a very small team in Ireland, but and I know some countries have bigger teams, others have even smaller again. But it is sometimes reaching out just to get a bit of information can be helpful. I would say bring stuff. What we find, our airports can be really, really tricky. And at the Coeliac Society, we are linking in with Dublin Airport at the moment to see what we can do to improve gluten-free food. Because if you end up, if you delayed flight or you're there for a couple of hours of stopover, you can't leave the airport to get food. And there's often little to nothing that's gluten-free. So I would say if you're traveling, bring your crackers, bring some of your bread, bring, food that you can eat that if you do end up delayed somewhere, you're not going to be hungry. A lot of airlines do allow you to bring an extra suitcase for your gluten-free food. They do. It's considered under medical. So it's really good. Now you have to be good with it. You can't order the extra suitcase and put your clothes in it, because they check. But if you do need to bring extra, if you're going for a few weeks and it might be tricky around your food, that you can actually just bring that extra suitcase and then you don't have to worry about it. I know some people, if they're going away, they actually use somewhere like a freight company to deliver a whole package of gluten-free food to where they're staying so that they are covered for it. So what I would say to you is I would assume there will be no gluten-free food at the airport. I would assume there'll be no gluten-free food at the rest stops if you're doing driving and things like that. Have that with you so that you're prepared. But do have a chat with the Coeliac Society here. We can give you some guidance and advice about that as well.
Talking about the Coeliac Society, when did that come on stream and why?
So that is, now I'm going to get into trouble for this. It's definitely more than 40 years old. I'm not going to give an extra date on it. It's been around for a long time. Initially, it was a lot of families who were just really struggling accessing gluten-free food. And even when we look at how much that has improved in the last 15 years, certainly when I qualified as a dietitian 30 years ago, things were very, very restricted. I can't imagine what they were like 40 and 50 years ago. So it was a lot of people just trying to get support and to feel like you're not alone. I think one of the hardest things is that if you're the only celiac in your friend group or your family group, you can feel like you are the person being difficult, even though you're not. But the society has grown. Now, we're still quite a small team. I think 7 of us at the moment, and a lot of us are part-time. But we work really, really hard to support people with celiac disease. And we are based in Clondalkin at the moment. We have a very small shop at the front of our offices in Clondalkin. So walk in, you can come in and meet us and say hello. Francis Brennan, who's our chef and food advisor, has really good, what we call select products in our shop. So their products are hard to get. What we haven't got in there is things you can pick up easily in the supermarket. But if you're looking for sauces, certain breads, if you're looking for kind of chocolate in particular is the big one, especially coming up to Christmas, you can pop in there. Now, as I said, it is a small shop, but if you're in the area, pop in and say hello. What we also do is I run a dietitian clinic for people with celiac disease for the Coeliac Society. So that means if someone has been diagnosed or if they're having issues with their diet, they can come in and see me, and I can actually take them through sort of a whole sort of investigation and see what's going on with them. And we do that a lot. Sometimes people even on the gluten-free diet are still having issues, so we might look at those. We do food demonstrations. We do a huge amount of events for children, for adults. We had our gluten-free roadshow in Dún Laoghaire there just a few weeks ago, which was fantastic. And we do a lot of advocacy for members as well. So we do a lot of catering training for restaurants, and then we'd lobby certainly with the government around kind of things like getting allowances for people. And we work as well to try and get more people diagnosed, because lots of people with celiac disease don't know they have it. They don't know why they're sick, or they don't know how to go about getting diagnosed or treated. And I know I've left out a million things that we also do in the Celiac Society. Have a look. Have a look.
I'll get to them.
Okay, oh, brilliant.
Are you a funded organisation?
So we're mainly funded with membership fees. So we do have to charge a membership fee at the moment. We'd love to be able to not to. But it's not huge. And what people do get is they get their celiac food list from that, and then they have access to it as a helpline and for us for any questions with it. So we get some funding from the HSE, but I think like every charity, you could always do with a little bit more with that. And I think any support, any donations, we really work hard to make very, very good use of any money that we have. Louise is in charge of that, and she is spectacular in terms of how we spend. And what we do, and telling us what we can and can't do. So that's fantastic. But it's really important, because to us, our members do kind of give us some membership money. And with that, and most of it is doing that food list book, which actually takes us, I think we calculated up about 6,000 hours a year in manpower to actually produce, which is huge for a little organization that we are. But we do, I mean, funding is always going to be brilliant. And we're always delighted if anybody feels like they can donate anything to us or support any of our events when we do run them.
Do you have any upcoming?
We have nothing upcoming at the moment, but we absolutely will. We've had this year, as I said, we did our third gluten-free roadshow in Dún Laoghaire, and we had one last year in Cork and one the year before that in Tullamore. So we're kind of going around the country with it. But they're absolutely fantastic. They're full day events where people with celiac disease can come in. The food is guaranteed gluten-free. So you can have your whole lunch and you don't have to be asking about gluten or anything. So people absolutely love that they can come in and relax. But we do a lot of educational sessions there, a lot of information, give people a chance to ask questions on it. We have all food producers come in and they give out lots of free samples. We have a fabulous goodie bag. Dunn Stores gave us huge support for that this year.
Right.
So we'll be running another one next year. So keep an eye on the website, or keep an eye on our newsletter when it comes out, and join up for that as well. But what we will have coming out shortly will be the goodies list for Christmas, which is all gluten-free chocolate and sweets that are going to be out there for everybody.
What about research? I think that's a huge part of what you do.
Oh, huge. And I was at the International Celiac Disease Symposium in September, which is it's a really, really big conference on celiac disease that runs every 2 years. And, it was a fantastic update in terms of the research on celiac disease. So we're looking at lots of different things, like a big connection between migraine and celiac disease, and migraine and gluten is coming out of that. We're looking at how we're diagnosing so that we're not getting, hopefully, looking at how we can diagnose people quicker, but also looking to see, can we prevent it? Because we don't have any cure for celiac disease. So there was a lot of research around, is there anything we can do to stop people having celiac disease triggered? The answer is not yet. Right. There's a lot of research, there's a huge research platform with that. And obviously in the Coeliac Society, we do research ourselves at the moment on a smaller scale, but we're building up with it. So we're looking at projects around, how can we predict gut damage in people with celiac disease? We're looking at other autoimmune diseases that lots of people have, and then things like, there's a big debate about oats and celiac disease. So we're doing some research in that as well. So it's really important just to try and get as much information for our members as we possibly can.
We're right at the end of our time. You'd be glad to know. Is there anything else you'd like to throw out there before we go?
I don't think so. You've covered, I think, a huge range of stuff with it. I suppose if I was going to say one last thing, if you're not celiac, will you please be nice to the celiacs that you do know? It's the only thing I would ask for you. They're not being difficult. They'd love to be able to eat all the foods that they can. So just be nice to them.
I can vouch for the website. It's fantastic. It's full of information. And I would certainly recommend anybody with celiac disease to go and read it. You might just give it out before we go.
We're on celiac, so it's coeliac.ie, and that's coeliac.ie. We are also on Instagram at Coeliac Ireland, and we post loads of information on our Instagram page as well about celiac disease, about our activities, everything that we're doing. So actually do come along and join us on Instagram if you are on Instagram.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
So thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank
You're
you.
very good.